It's hard to believe, but it's time for a year-end review. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today I have my December wrap-up, which is also going to be my 2024 wrap-up, or my year-end review. I'm going to kind of combine those both into one video. So for that reason, I'm not going to go over every book I read in great detail. I did finish 18 books this month, which was good, especially after November, where I had a very slow reading month due to other circumstances. Of the 18 books I finished, most of them are advanced reader copies. I think 15 of them were. And of those, most of them will have reviews coming out on my channel. If they haven't already happened, then they'll be coming out throughout the month of January. You know, the way most of my reviews happen is as soon as I read a book, I'll write a review and post it on Goodreads. That may be immediately after I finish a book, or if it's something I want to sit with and think about a day or two after I finish a book. Just depends on how I feel about the book. But my Goodreads review and my Storygraph review, that will happen more or less right away. And then if it's a book that I want to do a video review for, I'll usually do that review also right away. Sometimes I wait until I have 2 or 3 reviews that I can record at a time. But then I release those video reviews on my channel kind of lined up with the publication dates of the books. So if they're back catalog books, I'll release those right away. But so all of the arcs, that's why I have reviews that are recorded that'll be coming out in the future months. However, there are a few arcs that I'm not going to do a video review on, and that's because if I were to do one, the criticism to praise ratio isn't quite what I would want it to be for a video. But I wanted to mention them because they weren't bad, they just didn't work for me, and other people may not be as hung up on the things that hang me up. So there are 3 of those I wanted to mention really briefly. The first one is called The Resurrectionist by A. Ray Dunlap, and this is a story that takes place in 19th century Scotland, and the main character is a young man who first he goes off to college at Oxford, but he drops out because he wants to become a doctor, and at that time, due to the religious laws of the country, there weren't a lot of cadavers to actually examine as part of your training, so you have to enroll in a special surgeon school, and most of the cadavers that they're getting are being robbed from graves, and so he actually ends up joining a grave robbing crew, and they start robbing graves, but then their crew runs up against Burke and Hare, who were real life grave robbers, and as a result of that, things ensue. And there was also a queer romance plot that was mixed in. And, overall, I thought the plot or the ideas behind the plot were fun, but it just didn't execute well. Everything felt very convenient. So an obstacle would come up and they'd solve it, and then another obstacle and then they'd solve it, and then another obstacle and then they'd solve it. So there's no overarching story that felt cohesive. It felt like these little vignettes that were just strung together. And the characters, they had a good shape to them, but you could never sink your teeth into them. They felt more like sketches. And then on top of that, the writing just felt very twee to me. I don't know if that makes sense. It wasn't whimsical. It didn't work for me. It was just a little too soft around the edges, the writing. And it was very too overly earnest. That might work for you. The setting was good. The overarching idea was good. The characters were fun, even if they weren't, particularly deep. I think if that part of history or those kind of stories are interesting to you, it isn't a particularly long read, so you might find it fun, at least more fun than I did. The next one I want to mention is Our Winter Monster by Dennis Mahoney, and this is a thriller that is an emotional thriller set on a couple who are going through difficult times, and you find out that they had some incident happen a year ago. The bad date night is how it's referenced. Ever since that night, their relationship has been very rocky, and they're going on a ski vacation to try to, bring the fire back to the relationship, to repair some of the damage. But things go wrong and they get confronted by this unimaginable monster that starts wreaking havoc on them as not even before they even arrive at their B&B, like while they're still in their car, and it starts wreaking havoc all over this town that they're going to visit. And so there's this mystery about what is this monster, where does it come from, and how does that relate to our main character's relationship. And it was fun. It was a pretty generic thriller. It didn't excite me. It didn't surprise me. It didn't offend me. It was a quick, fun read. Why the monster chose to attack at that time was never really made clear. And that is what made it a little less than compelling for me. It just felt convenient, like for plot reasons. And then the way the monster was defeated felt a little bit too neat for me, if that makes sense. So it didn't wow me over, but it didn't offend me. It was fun. If you're looking for a winter thriller that is a little bit different, as opposed to just being like a slasher set in the woods, then this might be for you. And then the last arc I want to talk about is called The Mole People by Kevin Lant. And this is a sympathetic look at a young woman who is suffering from schizophrenia. And due to her schizophrenia, she ends up running away from home, leaving her schooling, and then ends up unhoused, ends up with addiction problems, and ends up living underneath the streets of Las Vegas which is where this term mole people comes. And nothing really good can come from that environment. I thought the treatment of schizophrenia was actually really good. It wasn't kind of exploitative, or it didn't feel that way. But most of the dialogue in the story felt very clinical. Even though the plotting was decent, there was, good time jumps when they needed to be to kind of focus your attention on different things. It just felt like all of the dialogue was very clinical and very convenient. And the people she met were convenient for the plot of the story, but it didn't feel entirely genuine. However, I will say, as far as looking at depictions of mental health and mental disorders in fiction, this one did feel sympathetic and realistic, more or less, and it didn't feel sensationalized, which I appreciated a lot. So that might be something you are interested in as well. There were 3 non-advanced reader copies that I finished this month, only 3, because it was a very arc heavy month, especially because, as I've mentioned before, I'm going to be away for all of the month of January. So all of my arcs that are being published in January, I had to finish them this month. So there are only 3 books I read that weren't arcs. The first one is City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I've talked about this ad nauseum. I already have a review for it on my channel. The second one is A Christmas Ghost Story by Kim Newman. I think I've also mentioned this. It was an interesting little novella that is exploring family traditions and is kind of turning the idea of the Victorian ghost story on its head. You follow a single mother and her son, and the son is kind of coded as being neurodivergent, but that's never made explicit. But because of that, the writing is very stylized, very jagged around the edges. And over the course of Christmas, they experience either a haunting or a harassment. You can't really tell, but it's related to the mother's past and this Victorian ghost story that she imagined seeing on TV when she was a child, but then no one can confirm ever really aired. It's a fun little twist on a ghost story. It had a lot of interesting ideas. It just didn't really land for me completely. But again, it's a short novella. It gives you good Christmas vibes. So I enjoyed reading it. I thought the stylization in the writing was fun. And so you can add it to your queue of Christmas ghost stories for next year if you're looking for things to read. Then the last non-arc that I finished was Krampus the Yule Lord by Bram. I already put a review for this up on my channel, so you can go watch it there, but in short, I thought this was great. It's a winter story that I'm hoping to return to next year, because I had that much fun with it. I thought I did really interesting things with the mythos of both Santa Claus and Krampus, and so you can go check out my review for that for more info. Now, the only things I'm reading right now, I've been reading for a while. The first one is I'm reading Cujo by Stephen King. This is part of my continued project for the Buddhist path in fiction. And so I've already done videos on The Long Walk, and Lisey's story is going to be published in the beginning of January. Cujo is going to be the next one that comes out next month. So I am rereading that now to prepare for that video. And also I was inspired to join into Cthulhu Christmas. Now this is an event that is created and hosted by Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads and Alan at Big Hard Books, and where they just read H.P. Lovecraft stories that are part of the Cthulhu mythos over Christmas time. And, I've had this book for quite a while, which is The Complete Works of H.P. Lovecraft. And, I have read a number of Lovecraft's short stories over the years, but not a lot of them. And this book collects 53 short stories, 4 novellas, and his 1 novel. And I decided, it's time to just go through it. So I've started, and I'm not rushing, but I'm basically want to read a few of these a day, and it will probably take a month or so, but I hope to get through all of Lovecraft's work in that time. So I was inspired by their Cthulhu Christmas project, and I'm happy to be part of it. It got me excited to read more Lovecraft. So that is my general December 2024 wrap up, but I also wanted to do a year-end wrap up. And so first, I thought it'd be fun to look at some stats from Storygraph. So according to Storygraph, I have read 201 books this year, which was a total of 55,284 pages, which is a lot. More on that later. And this is an interesting graph, the books read versus pages read. I think it's just a fun thing to look at. You can see those months where I was reading chunkier books because the number of books dips much lower than the number of pages. And then you can see the months where I was reading either graphic novels or a lot of novellas because then the number of books jumps over the number of pages. Regardless of that, May and November were the months where I read the least amount of books and the least number of pages. And for November, that makes sense. I know I was busy. I don't know what was going on in May, but I guess I was busy. And then August was my busiest reading month. That makes sense. That was GarbAugust, and I really pushed hard to read a lot in GarbAugust. So those numbers all kind of make sense. Now, this graph is interesting. 55% of the books I read this month were less than 300 pages, and then 40% were between 300 and 499 pages, and that makes sense. Most horror novels, and that was my most read genre, are between 250 and 350, give or take. So it makes sense that the overwhelming majority of my books are going to be in that range. And then only 5% of the books I read this month were more than 500 pages. And that is something I think is probably going to change for next year because I have a lot of big, chunky fantasy novels that I'm really hoping to get to. And then the last interesting statistic is that 95% of the books I read were fiction and 5% were nonfiction. That means I read 9 nonfiction titles this year, and I had really hoped to read 12. My goal every year is to read one nonfiction book a month, and I didn't quite make that goal this year. So I'm going to continue that goal for next year. It's not something I stress on too hard, but I do like to try to read one nonfiction book a month. So we'll see how I can do it next year. I came close this year, but not quite there. So for some overall thoughts on my reading here, I had a fun and diverse reading here. The majority of the books I read were horror, but I did read quite a lot of other books as well. And there were a lot of books that I had a really fun time reading. You know, there were a few duds, a few stinkers, but not many. And it's been such a long year that when I look back at some of the books I read in January and February, I barely remember that those were this year alone. So when I actually looked back and saw what books I was reading just in 2024, I realized I read a good diversity of books, all different subgenres of horror especially, and I had fun reading all of them. This was my busiest reading year ever, both in terms of book count and page count, and part of that is because I had many more advanced reader copies this year than I have before, and that is in part just due to my inability not to request every single arc that looks interesting. So that is a thing I have to work on for next year, because the arcs really stress me out a little bit. When I have that many arcs to read, then reading becomes an obligation. And because I feel really obligated if I agree to read something by a certain deadline and to write a review of it before that deadline, whatever it may be, then I do feel obligated to do that. And it doesn't make the reading less fun, but it just makes it more stressful when I know I have deadlines like that. And it also means that I don't read as many other things I may be interested in, especially longer books, because I know that if I have an 800 or a 900 page fantasy book I want to read, that is going to take up the same amount of reading time as maybe 3 arcs that I have on my docket that I've already promised to read. So this year was a little bit stressful with that many books and that many arcs, and that's something I'm looking to ameliorate for next year. But aside from that, I read a lot of debut authors this year. That also goes with reading as many arcs, and it was a mixed bag. I think I enjoyed it, and I think I'm going to continue to try to read a lot of debut authors. In the horror space especially, there's a lot of great indie horror, and there are a lot of debut authors who have interesting things to say in horror and are using horror and other genres as a way to explore things that you don't see in mainstream press as much. And so I enjoyed reading that many debut authors. I think it was about half-half. You know, the books that I thought were great and you could barely tell they were a debut author, and the books that were, maybe needed a little more polishing before they went out the door. I don't mind reading a couple duds if it means I get to find new authors in the process. So I did read a lot of debut authors this year, and I look forward to doing that next year. And as far as kind of group things I did, this year I did 2 buddy reads, one with Alex from Alex Unabridged and one with Carl from Please Read Your Book, and I had a great time with both of those. And I did 3 different booktube collaborations. The first one was I appeared in the Why Read series with Joanna on Joanna Reads, and my buddy read with Carl, we did some videos regarding that. And then also I did a short video for Gareth's Best of the Year 2024 Sci-Fi and Fantasy Edition on book, songs, and other magic. So I did a few collaborations this year as well, and those were a lot of fun. And that all brings me to some of my goals for 2025. Now, I've said some of these before, but again, briefly, I want to read fewer books and I want to read slower. I don't have an interest in reading 200 books a year. Ideally, I would like to read around 100 books a year, actually. I think that is a good number. I think between 40 and 50,000 pages is a decent page count to aim for, but reading 200 books, regardless of how many pages it is, it was more fast paced than I want to be. And I partly realized that as a result of these buddy reads that I've been doing, as well as the Stephen King project I've been doing, because for all of those, I actually took notes on the books as I was reading it. Usually when I'm reading a book, I might underline something or highlight something that is interesting to me or something that I want to think more about, but I don't take notes in a notebook about the books I read. Yet because these are books that I want to talk about later, and I want to be able to reference page numbers and I want to have quotes, I actually have a notebook that I've been taking notes in as I read these books, both for my buddy reads and for my Stephen King project. And so just the act of taking notes, like physically writing out notes longhand, caused me to read more slowly, and I really appreciated that and I enjoyed it. So I'm hoping to do that more, and I'm hoping to just create more of a habit of taking notes on the books that I read, even if it's not for a project that I'm working on. So not only do I want to read fewer books next year, I want to read more slowly. I want to be more selective with my arcs, and I think I'm already doing a good job of that. My January and February are already filled from arcs that I had already requested last year, but looking from March onward, I only have a handful, and I've already restrained myself numerous times from clicking that request button on books that look interesting, because it just is too much and it's going to overwhelm my schedule. So there are a few authors that I really like, and there are a few books that I'm really interested in reading, but I'm going to be much more selective in what arcs I request so I can have a little more freedom in my reading. And that's the goal, at least. And that way I won't have the heavy sense of obligation that, I mean, I created it for myself, but it'd be nice not to have that. I also want to read more series in 2025. I did just recently release a video of my anticipated series of 2025, and there was, I think, over 30 series there, going from sci-fi to fantasy and horror series. And I don't think I'll be able to read all of those series, but I do want to read more series. I really enjoy reading series, and I like being able to do a review of a trilogy or of a series, because for me, there's something fun in that synthesis of trying to find the meaning of this long-ranging series and put it into one video without doing spoilers, but giving the flavor and taste and the underlying themes of a series is just like a fun project for me. It's a fun, writing those kind of reviews is a fun exercise for me. So not only do I want to read more series because I enjoy that experience, but I enjoy the idea of synthesizing them into reviews that people might find useful. So I definitely want to read more series in 2025. I want to read more fantasy and sci-fi in 25. You know, fantasy, sci-fi, and horror are my favorite genres. If you look at the genre breakdown this year, though, it was overwhelmingly horror, which I appreciate. It's still my favorite genre. It's still my comfort genre. When I don't know what to read, I'm almost always going to reach for a horror book, but I do want to read more fantasy and more sci-fi in next year. And I've already kind of lined up some buddy reads that are going to push me into the fantasy and sci-fi space a little more. And some of the big series I've already started that I'm really keen on continuing are fantasy series. So I am hoping to find a little more equilibrium between fantasy, sci-fi, and horror in 2025. That brings me to some buddy reads. You know, I want to do more buddy reads in 2025. I had such a joy doing it. You know, I don't have any book clubs that I'm part of, and I know there are digital book clubs, and I'm sure I could find some. But up until now, I've never done any sort of book club or any sort of buddy read, and I had such a great time with it. I do have a couple buddy reads already lined up for 2025, but I'm hoping to do more. The ones I have lined up already are with Alex from Alex on a Bridge. We're going to continue our Tyrant Philosopher series by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And once that's done, we're going to switch to do some sci-fi. And once that's done, we have a horror one as well. So we have a couple buddy reads lined up. And he and I are having a great time with those buddy reads. And those are all offline. Those aren't done for YouTube. Those are just for us. And they're really fun. I'm having a great time with them. I have a buddy read lined up with Joanna from Joanna Reads and Philip Chase to read some Ursula K. Le Guin. Left Hand of Darkness, I think, is the plan, and I'm excited for that. And then I also am looking to read the Xenogenesis trilogy by Octavia Butler with Carl from Please Read Your Book. So those are all kind of lined up for 2025, but I'm hoping to do more throughout the whole year. Those are all kind of front heavy. I think they'll be done by March. So I'm hoping to do more throughout the whole year. And as I read, I'm going to be announcing what books I'm reading, assuming I have some sort of plan. And so if anyone's interested in buddy reads, a few people have already mentioned it in previous videos. So I'll be announcing that, and hopefully we can work some things out, because I'm hoping to do more buddy reads next year. And I'm also hoping to do more BookTube collaborations. You know, I want to increase my community participation in BookTube, and that isn't just doing tags, and that isn't just doing reading events. It's also doing more collaborations with other BookTubers. So that is another thing I'm hoping to do in 2025. I think that's it for me. It's been a busy month. I've read a lot. I've caught up with a lot of the things that I had kind of slowed down on due to November being so busy. And now January is going to be a very strange month. I'm going to be away all month. I won't be near a computer. So who knows what I'm going to be doing. If I'm going to be playing catch up again in February, we'll find out. I'm looking forward to 2025, but I had a great reading year in 2024, and I've been on BookTube almost 6 months now. And so ending the year with this BookTube video, I think, is really special. And I've had a great time on BookTube, and I look forward to more of all the same in 2025. If you have any thoughts about what you would like to see on my channel next year, or if you have any other ideas about series I should read, or buddy reads I should do, or collaborations you think might be fun, please let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. But for now, I'll say thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.